It's a pleasure to have everyone here. I would like to welcome you to the Thought Leadership Series. We're going to be doing a webinar every month with a handful of panelists to really discuss some topics that are pertinent to us Zoho partners when it comes to best practice to really make for the best implementations. So we all know that as Zoho partners in the professional services world, we're here to have satisfied clients. There are a few goals that obviously come with this. We want to have clearly defined onboarding and expectation management. We want to have a good project plan with defined scopes of work. We want to be able to communicate frequently with clients that have all these relationships governed by good contracts that are clear for everyone. And ultimately, this will lead to good repeat work. So for the first of the series, we're going to be kicking off discussions on that onboarding and expectation management and how do we actually get these projects kicked off on the right foot with clients. So for today's agenda, we're going to be doing some introductions. I'd love to introduce you to our panelists today. We're then going to discuss client onboarding, intake, stakeholder interviews. We'll then dive into some business process mapping, how we get to understand client systems and businesses. We'll dive into some of the technical diagrams that can be helpful in understanding that. And then we'll touch on some tools and resources to help us along the way. So without further ado, my name is John Mark Bantock. I'm the CEO here at Catalyst Connect. Joining me today is Susan Clark from Cornerstone, Brett Martin from Zenatta, and Vinu Rajendran from Nimbis. So we're very excited here to discuss some of the topics at hand and also be available for a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So let's dive in here. What is business process mapping and why is it important? Well, I think that we can all identify with this, right? Clients come to us with this disorganized mess of frantic notifications that, hey, this workflow will trigger, my API calls are exhausted, I'm disorganized, I need to implement Zoho. Or my favorite is, I'm not really using all that Zoho has to offer, I just want to be better. And we've given this really ambiguous, most of the time, task of helping to organize our clients' processes, businesses, and really get to understand their organizations so we can best position Zoho's apps and services to help improve their processes. So I think that one of the most important things that we can do is lay out a really good framework for how to tackle this. You know, clients come to us usually very excited about Zoho, but very rarely having a well-organized approach, not only to their own processes, but how they want to implement Zoho. And we all know that it's going to be a failure if we tackle every single app all at once without really having things organized. So the first thing that I really like to do is really set up some expectations for what the client expects out of this relationship. And the first thing is asking them what they define as a win. All too often, our understanding of what the software is going to do for them doesn't necessarily align with theirs right out of the box. And we need to make sure that we get on that alignment to understand what are their major goals and pain points and what direction are we all heading. The next we find is to define good points of contact. We know how frustrating it can be if we have points of contact at our client that changes halfway through the project, and getting a new person up to speed on what is Zoho and which apps are we going to deploy can really derail a project halfway through. Of course, we want to have good communication channels and set up protocols for how quickly we're going to be responding to email versus a phone call, text message, or client portal, whatever forums you're setting up. It's important that everyone knows what that channel is used for. And then, of course, we want to understand timelines and when the project's going to get started, how it's going to roll out, go through testing, and stay on budget. So at this point, I'd like to just refer you to a little workflow here that I found really helps me onboard new clients and give them a bit of a direction of what this process is going to look like. Because we have multiple folks involved on our end throughout the project. We have a team of about 23, and we guide folks through system architecture and workflow design through to obviously the project management pieces, the full development team that may be coming in at different pieces of the project. And we like to show clients this little workflow of how we're going to be going through this process together. And I'd love to open it up to the panelists to just ask you guys, how do you set up good expectations with your clients? Or would you like to weigh in on some gotchas that you've had in the past, or some key takeaways that you never begin a project without addressing with clients?
I'd like to,
go ahead, Susan.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
So did you use like Visio or Lucidchart, or what do you use for doing your workflows?
Yeah, great question. We really like draw.io. It's the open source framework that actually Lucidchart and many other drawing applications are built on. So we've actually integrated draw.io into our customer portal. We have a really slick customer portal that we invite folks to do all of the onboarding. There's some diagramming tools built in there. And that's certainly how we begin kicking things off. And I'd love to show you that. We'll be diving into those diagrams in a sec here. But yeah, this particular diagram was initially done in draw.io, and then we had our designer make it into a nice 8.5 by 11 format for us.
Okay, Brett, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, I think I was just going to say, John Mark, the question was kind of, what are our kind of flows kind of thing and dealing with this when customers come in? I think it's interesting because I would say at least 50% of the time, you kind of have this clear set of expectations potentially in the initial SOW. These are going to be your focuses, and this is what you're going to work on. I think one of the problems you run into with Zoho is that there's just a lot there. And then, you usually kind of be in the middle of you'll start off oftentimes in the deep discovery phase where you're going through what are your business processes? What is this? When do you like to deal? What are the stages of your deals? And you can spend so much time just on that, right? What are the trigger points that happen on those? And then you all of a sudden it's like, well, we'll need this application to make that happen for you. Or did you know you could do this? And it's really around keeping a clear focus, and kind of taking it in real bite-sized chunks to get to where you need to go. Now, oftentimes, you're going to need to have that entire scope down so that you know what order to do your chunks in. Right. But there tends to be, I think, a real eagerness to just jump ahead and get into some other things. But before that, it's kind of about laying the groundwork. So I think for us, a lot of the times it's like, look, let's get all the foundational pieces in place, and make sure all that's done. And then we can kind of go into the other things that, yes, I know are exciting. And yes, you definitely do need, but we need to take baby steps, as it were.
Yeah, I think that to kind of off of that, the foundation often, sometimes we get clients where they're, brand new accounts, right? Starting up with Zoho, they're, growing out of their Google Sheet, Google Drive solutions, and they're looking to migrate, right? And so you can use their existing platforms as that, foundation, that reference to, define your future architecture. But that foundation, when it isn't, when you're working off of an existing Zoho account, can be really tricky. And I think it's very tempting, and we're definitely guilty of this because we love it, to jump in and just automate right off the bat, right? And say, oh, this is how we can improve your existing workflow. And a big important part of that is to just take that step back and say, hey, what is your larger vision? What do you how do you define a win? What are you trying to achieve at the end of the day? Not just now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? So we can assess your architecture at that point and say, well, yes, your solution is going to work, right? But in 3 years, this practice is just not going to scale with the, where the industry is going, right? So how can we, kind of redefine what work together to define what that win is, and come to a common understanding. And as a design focused team, we like to, really think about that design process, really doing our, requirements gathering, benchmarking. We like to do this fast, and try and implement ideas and prototypes as fast as possible so we can iterate through solutions and then see, because oftentimes I think it's really hard to define what you really want. You kind of have this vague vision, but to like kind of bridge the gap between what is, what are you trying to, what do you want to achieve, and what is like the technical terms to like actually implement that. We have to like kind of work together to develop that, and tools like draw.io. We use Lucidchart personally, but I'm not super happy with it. We're still trying to work out what the right solution for quick mapping and communication of these ideas is. So.
And Brett,
I
was gonna say, I'm jealous that Brett gets a statement of work from his clients. I so very rarely get a statement of work. They're like, I don't know, you know this stuff really well. Why don't you tell us what to do?
And we write the statement of work.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Got it. I thought you were doing it. And the other thing is defining a win. John Mark, I thought was real important, because I've had people say, mostly I say, how will you know the project's been successful? That's more how I phrase it. At the end of the thing, how will you determine whether the project has been successful? And sometimes it's more like when everyone is on their phones and entering everything in. So I would never have thought that. I mean, they're like, because I'm all about the design and everything. So it is good to know what they consider successful, or what they consider a win. So.
Yeah, exactly. And we had a couple of questions pop up here in the chat. How do you determine what are those foundational apps or processes? And I think that a good way to start is to define the direction of your river. If we look at Zoho as this main artery, this river that we're heading to the ocean, there are going to be lots of little arterials that are going to spin off, and we've got to make sure that we're coming back to that main track. And there are going to be times that we're going to have to dive down into the weeds and get into that detail, but we've got to make sure that we're keeping it back onto the main objectives. So when we lay out an initial engagement, we really talk about, big picture. What do you want? Where do you want to go with your organization? How do you want technology to help complement your strategic objectives? And then it's our jobs as technology implementers to plan for outcomes. We want to make sure that the software that we're implementing is driving strategic directions for the company towards the outcomes they're looking for. And we should be really cognizant of building software that actually has measurables and defines an outcome and some incremental improvement that we're looking for. Of course, we want to do this in a way that is replicable, that we can then measure those results, and we do it in a way that achieves adoption across the board. Because without adoption, all the work we do is utterly useless. So that is going to be a difficult one to write, because half the time we find that the solutions that we want to implement, we can't do right off the bat. We're going to have to step them through that process, because a lot of folks are new to using CRMs and technology to help govern processes. And if we just dive them into a fully automated system, it's going to be a loss. So we need to incrementally take them to where they need to go. So let's.
I think also, John Mark, you've got so many stakeholders, and every stakeholder has their own different version of what success is, right? And it's really getting them on the same page, because management needs detailed reporting and they want to know what's going on and what everybody's doing, right? Sales wants a quick in and out. They want to know what their day is, what they can, easy input, all of those kind of things. And, there's a balance between simplicity, ease of use, elegance day to day, and getting the reporting that everybody wants, and you can get too granular. And that's a real balancing act too, with all the different stakeholders.
Yeah, we always start with, in design, we like repeatedly talk about pain points and value propositions, right? Like what are the things that you're struggling with? Where are your biggest holes in inefficiency, your biggest holes of error, right? It might seem that people are just not using the software correctly, but why are they not using it, right? So we try to really, by understanding what's going wrong and really highlighting those pain points, we can, take those stakeholders and see, how can we drive value for those, right? And then we also like to take an approach where we kind of to Vanessa's point, like it doesn't matter what the software is, right? understand your process, understand your culture. And so as we partner with these, organizations to help them grow their systems, it's not just, about the CRM, but what is your company culture? How do you operate? And, even within the same industry, we'll find that I've never implemented the same solution for multiple clients. It's always different because it really comes down to, as annoying as that is, right?
The elusive vertical solution. Gosh,
thank
how many
you.
times have we all tried to do that?
It's like, if it could work, right?
I think one thing that Brett said, and you kind of alluded to it, John Mark, is that one of the things I try to figure out up front is where they want to go, particularly with reports. More than anything, what reports do you want at the end? Even if we won't get to reports, the kind of thing that they want out of it, if you don't know ahead of time what kind of report they want, you can build a whole system that won't give them the report they need. And so even though we may not get to advanced analytics or something until much later, or that we won't get to books or we won't get to whatever, having that in sight, in view, in mind is like super important. But then once they, Howard, then there's a problem, because once they verbalize that in view, to them it becomes project scope. Do you know what I'm saying? They're like, okay, well, we talked about it. That's part of the scope. No, I just wanted to know where we were going. So it's hard to control that.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And, one of the most important things that I think that we got to do as a foundational step here is really understanding, that outcomes-based approach, getting all stakeholders on the same page so that we know the direction that we're heading, and then map it out as a journey. That just because we state what the end goal is going to look like 6 months, a year from now, doesn't mean that that's what we're going to have out of the box in 3 months. So one of the more important things that I think we do as an organization is try to get a lot of our clients thinking about all of these processes and procedures and automation ahead of time. There's nothing more frustrating as an implementer than implementing the same thing 5 times because you get a different wish list from each department head, and or having conflicting priorities of what needs to be worked on. So part of what we kick off every project with is an initial client intake. And we've built this into our portal. This is a quick screenshot of it. And essentially what we do is we walk clients through a little bit of a questionnaire by department, just prompting them to tell us what is your process, for your marketing or for your sales qualification. What are some of the pain points that you're facing, and what are the key objectives that you have in implementing a CRM to help with this process? And this has been really beneficial to make sure that all of the stakeholders at the client side really are on the same page as to what their process actually is, because a lot of the times we obviously need to help shape that process in light of what the software can do, but it's good for the client to come to the table with a good understanding of how their own organization operates. So we find that prompting them with some of these questions ahead of time and then diving into the stakeholder interviews, and the way that we set that up is by having them essentially do a reverse demo. We get all of this information about their organization and their strategic approach to how they want to grow. So we have the background info, and then we kick off an onboarding call by having them walk us through their process as it exists today, whether it's in Zoho or not. We just want to see the software that they're using today, where their pain points are. And that is really a good tool that we find to start to find out where all these arteries are. And, we have this main process vein that we're looking at, and it helps us uncover some of the inefficiencies in their process. So opening it up to the other panelists here, what is your process for starting those stakeholder interviews and getting consensus on what a client's process and goals are?
I have a question first, John Mark.
Sure.
One issue that we come across with, right, is the person who comes to us requesting a project, requesting deployment, right, might be from, say, the sales or marketing team, right? And they do want, when we're looking at these companies, right, there is definitely that room to integrate these other aspects, right? We can see when we're talking about pain points and the issues, well, the problems are not outside in these departments, but someone in another department has come and approached you. So they're pitched the project, they've oriented it from a, say, marketing perspective, right? So how, like, do you get buy-in from, do you tend to try and get buy-in from the rest of the company before proceeding?
Yeah, great question. So the way that we lay this out is that we want all department heads to be involved in this initial intake. So we had a question here, what is that video link for? Oftentimes what we'll do is we've actually created industry profiles, specific lines of questions or best practices for an industry to really prompt clients with a direction and an idea. Some of the feedback that we had in the early days is that we were just giving them a blank slate of, what do you want? And we'll build it for you. That got us down so many rabbit holes and doing so many custom pieces. And oftentimes what the client wants isn't necessarily what they need. So the video helps kind of prompt a direction and gives a framework for this is how we think that you should approach your marketing and your lead qualification in Zoho. So for each of these tabs, we'll give a little video that will go over, here's how you can connect Sales IQ with your web forms and bring in this data, how a lead qualification workflow could work. And then we prompt the client to, we invite all department heads to this portal so they can all weigh in on what that process is. And I think that that's important because we start to get all the departments' wish lists. We start to see where there's synergy and where perhaps there are conflicts. And then we're asked to work with a single point of contact who's ultimately going to be making the decision on what flies and what doesn't. And I think that this is a very important precursor to getting user adoption, because if everyone has, hey, I want X, Y, and Z out of the system, and they see those components in the final build, they're going to feel a part of the process and be invested in the success of that solution. So I think that requiring that all folks are involved and having them on that initial intake prompts some very good discussion and buy-in to the implementation.
Definitely. We've definitely been pushing clients in that direction as well, because having that just company-wide buy-in is really important to make sure that this is a solution that will, not just last for a couple of years or for a small department, but actually be able to, cross like crazy sales and marketing data against your end invoices, and not just, for example, see the volume of leads coming in from Google Ads, but the quality of those leads and how many are converting and things like that.
Yeah.
John Mark, I guess to answer your question, we take the whole stakeholder onboarding and interviews and that whole process pretty much the same as we do development. Everything is agile. Everything is sprints. Mm-hmm. So there's a 1 hour meeting, and after that 1 hour meeting, there are deliverables from them. There's deliverables from us. Another meeting is set. It might be with different stakeholders, but it's just a series of sprints. Each sprint is completed when the next meeting starts. That's the completion of that sprint and then the start of a new sprint, right? And we treat onboarding the same as development. So once we get through that, then basically you're in the development mode. And by breaking them down into kind of these nifty little chunks, it tends to make it very digestible, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's probably going to be the topic for the next webinar. Is going to be project management and an agile versus waterfall approach, perhaps a bit of a hybrid, but all very important. So what we typically do after the initial stakeholder interviews is start to map this all out. And Brett, I really liked your point about having 1 hour meetings and action items from that meeting. I think that we all know how quickly you can burn out in doing this. And this is very intense work. I mean, I find that after I do an intake, man, you need to go take a nap on the couch. I have a very comfy one right there. It's very mentally intensive work, and you really have to pay attention and be on it. And so the way that we structure things is no more than 2 hour long meetings. After that, we just find that we burn out. We tend to do an initial interview to go over the process. Then we may have some follow-ups with each department head. And while we are having those stakeholder interviews, we start to do our diagramming. There's a lot of detail, a lot of nuance that we're going to be going over. And the first thing that we like to do is just get a comprehensive map of the software systems that they're using, just to understand high level what ecosystems they're in today, which ones they're looking to drop, which ones they must keep. We then start to map out their process next, just really, very basic workflows, much like you saw in the couple slides beforehand, not really worrying about too much detail, just what is the overall process for their organization. We also like to get a sense of their stakeholders, who's going to be interacting with the system, how do they fit into the org chart, because that becomes important for discussing security, roles, access permissions, reporting needs, etc. I think the important thing to note here is that we've got to strike a balance about getting enough detail in these charts that they are meaningful, but that they also don't take 30 minutes to understand. You need to be able to glance at these charts and graphs and understand what's going on. It's a prompt for you to remember back all of that detail. I find that when we've done very detailed workflows, it honestly just becomes too cumbersome and very difficult to maintain. So I think that there's a little bit of a balance there to strike. So
that's the things where we like Lucidchart a lot, because we'll do maps where like you can actually create links and nest into things, right? So you can click on a box and expand a workflow and learn more details, right? Or navigate to a different tab, really make not just a process map, but like something that's more interactive.
Yeah.
But it is so much work to build that. And often you'll go through that entire process and it's like, it makes perfect sense to you, but it's not what the client needs, right? And like, your system and IT roadmap is like different than like, your general story. So a lot.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good point. And oftentimes we find that those workflows are going to change, right? We're going to help shape their process. And oftentimes what we need to do is go back and forth between an entity relationship diagram and our process diagrams. And so let me show you an example of our entity relationship diagrams. This is a great way to just start to figure out what data components they need saved in the CRM, what we're going to have in other apps. This also is an easy way to start to identify what that tech ecosystem is going to look like. Obviously, there's overlapping functionality between different Zoho apps. As we start to understand client processes and how all of this data needs to fit in, we can determine what apps we're going to use. So we use an entity relationship diagram like this to really understand what components we need. And I think that everyone that's been in Zoho a while, you start to think in terms of modules and fields and workflows, and it's just second nature that we tracking service contracts. Boom, we need a new module for that because we understand that there could be many service contracts to an account, and we need to be able to tie that to a point of contact. And so we start to think in terms of these visual maps of data and modules, and that can be very difficult for a client to understand who's never worked in a software system. So we find that it's really good to just start plotting things in your diagramming tool without doing any kind of connections or one-to-many, many-to-many relationships. Just put it on the map. We know that we need to, for instance, discuss our service packages, and they're going to be tied to products, and they're going to be multiple products as part of packages. And this prompts a lot of good conversation to understand how clients see their businesses. And then we start to fill in the gaps of how this data needs to be connected, to Susan's point, to give them the right data for reporting on the back end, because there's nothing worse than getting to do analytics and we have to do hop, skips, and jumps through multiple query tables just to get them the reports that they need, when we could have just made the direct connection and designing the system from the get-go. So we find that doing these diagrams really help identify things like linking modules, understanding lookup relationships, and then having a visual to show the client how all of this data is going to come together in combination with the process diagram. So we oftentimes go back and forth between an entity relationship diagram like this at a high level and the process diagram. So not quite sure how you guys approach those discussions with clients and explaining what a linking module is and what this many-to-many versus many-to-one relationship looks like.
Never. I mean, I guess I do, obviously the first thing you have to, we say, let's start with the lead. How do you get the leads? How do they come into the system? And where I'm verbally making the relationships, but I don't think I would ever talk to them about many-to-many relationships. I think it would just
all the time, and it's so much fun. I think the trick is exactly like when you start with a diagram like this, John Mark, like this is not the diagram that you start with. This is the diagram that you ended up with after starting with this.
Sure.
You were like, wait a minute, I need to add more detail and like draw the extra lines. And then you start making it way more complicated. And then you're like, wait a minute, I just made this too complicated. Let me take a step back again and make it like this, right? And so when we're explaining, these relationships and the connections, I usually just ask the clients, hey, like, take a step back. Just what is the big picture? Don't worry about the tech. We're not trying to scare you as much dev as we are going to do in your system. Don't be scared by it. Your gravity forms is just going to come to your leads. We're going to do deduplication in that process to make, and potentially flag that duplicate. And if a lead is pre-qualified, it's going to automatically convert, right? And just sticking with just the high level, whenever you're lost, go back to the big picture. That will ground you.
Yeah, I think that this is that big picture that you were talking about, right? Is just a little bit of swim lanes to discuss process and just, what does the process look like? And oftentimes this is where we'll start with clients is, just tell us about your business. What do you guys do? And we'll go through and just, jot little notes here and determine what's coming in. Are we assigning leads through a custom function, or can we use the default lead assignment engine? Are we pushing things through to campaigns at some point in the process if they don't get qualified? In talking through this process, we can start to identify, oh, wait, he's selling service packages? Is that just line items, or is that grouping of products? Are we going to be using inventory and composite items or bundles, or are these service packages that we need to track in the CRM and build time against? And we start to go down all of these little rabbit holes of are we using projects, and how does that roll in, and does a scope of work from a service package automatically kick off a project template? We're probably going a million miles an hour kind of figuring all of this out, but we have to lay all the puzzle pieces on the table, so to speak, first over here before we can then go back to that ER diagram and see what's going to fit best.
You're not taking notes this way, are you?
A lot of the time I do, to be honest. So we record all of our client calls. So we do everything via Zoom. We have certainly done on-sites before, but I really like these 2-hour max kind of intense engagements, because it allows you to be focused. We have multiple screens going on. So typically that we have 2 people on the call. We have one person taking notes, written notes. We have the call recorded, and then typically what I'm doing is just laying out these components in front of the client on the call. That way we can all see it, we can understand what the process is, and I'm just taking these little blurbs of notes, as you see here, and then we start to string them together. And it really helps in doing this in that dynamic way, because then everyone can kind of remember the different pieces of the puzzle that we're talking about.
And John Mark, back to your thing around how do you linking modules and all that? I think that comes out of this. And I never talked to him about linking module. I talk about relationships, right? So when you're, if you look at real estate, there's so many different ways of going around that. And you talk about no CRM being the same. I think we have 30, 35 real estate companies that we have set up. Not one of them is even remotely the same. They all have differences. You can't clone a thing off of it. But, you'll look and you say, okay, if this person's an appraiser, do you want to know every property that they've ever appraised for you? Well, of course I do. Right. Okay. Now this person's just a realtor. Do you want to know every time they made an offer? Well, of course I do. Right. So just by going through that process of, what are your vendors look like? What do your clients look like? What do all these people look like? What are the processes where they're involved with you? And do you want these relationships built? You're not really even thinking what is linking. It's just, you want to see that in their record. And I think it's like what you're doing here. It's basically just this entire conversation of understanding the relationships that are important to them in their business and then putting all that together.
Yeah, I think that Brett, you kind of touched on something that's interesting. It's that final point there. It's this: tell me more, ask why. I think that, as technology consultants, we need to be curious. We need to, really ask the questions. And we're not here to just do exactly what the client comes to us off the gate. We really need to understand their organization and their nuances. So I like that curiosity and driving down into the detail, because it's through that you really understand, what are the data points that they're looking to track. And one of the tools that we like to do to help facilitate this is basically, we use this as a precursor to doing any kind of blueprints. So for like a lead qualification or deal stages, we will have these 3 columns over here. We'll kind of map the major statuses or stages down the middle. And then we like to discuss, well, what are your users doing at each stage? Why does that stage exist? Do you have too many stages, too few? Again, that comes down to that balance, right? We want to be able to have enough stages to understand bottlenecks and, key milestones in a process. But we don't want to get so granular that reporting becomes cumbersome and users never want to update the system. So we like to strike that balance, put the major milestones here, understand what users are doing at each of these stages, but then also see what the system can do to help complement those activities. And ultimately, we are implementing software to help drive a process forward. So what are the user actions, the milestones, the things that are going to get that person or that entity to the next step in the process? So this is typically what we do to help map that out. And I'm curious how you guys approach that symbiotic relationship between a sales rep and their activities and what the system is doing, and this balance between not having so many tasks for the sales rep that they get drowned out, and I think we've all been there, right, where you're golden with your tasks and your emails if it falls under 20. The moment that you get under 50 tasks, screw it, I know that they're tasks there, I'll look at it later. So we need to strike that balance between having enough prompts and having things clear enough that they are welcoming working in the system. So how do you guys approach that?
I think that especially when we get to lay it out like this, which is usually a privilege sometimes with some of the speed of these projects. When we get to lay it out like this, it's really helpful for us, and it's helpful for the managers or whoever is helping us define this. But oftentimes I see that doesn't get fully communicated down to the actual end users, right, that are actually using the system. And so that's where, strategy, like we want to do as much as we can to take that burden and just remove that from the brain, right? Like have the tasks automatically be created when you hit a certain stage, right? And so in addition to how you have these laid out, we'll also include hey, we want to also have this created as a task. There should be a click notification and reminder here, because email, let's get rid of that as much as we can. And one strategy we really like to use is, especially when we use a blueprint, we'll always update, well, this is the stage, this is your single line, or sometimes multi-line, prefer single line, next steps, right? This is where you are, this is where you're going, right? This is what you need to get done next. And that's your happy day, scenario, right? Then you have, in your blueprint, hey, these are the 3 other, ed cases that'll kick them out to junk or whatever. But whatever strategies we can use to, in some way, one, without engaging email, but have tasks, have notifications, fields in the CRM, something in the business card that will help prompt the user to know what is the next step. It unlocks that from their brain. They can just easily shift between different types of leads and that kind of stuff.
And I think actually going back to this is that I actually like to have at least one salesperson in our scoping meetings, because, and if not, I always tell the client up front, I will try and represent the sales rep in all of these meetings, because if you haven't included them, they need to. And ultimately, the success of a project is dependent on user input, and your sales team is putting it in. And if you're not making it easy for them, if you're not giving them some benefit, if you can't see how you're making the salesman's life easier, this project will fail.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying. You can say, I'll fire them if they don't fill it out. fine, that's up to you. But you have to do something that will make their lives easier. And so
it's a real delicate balance, though, isn't it? On these scoping calls, especially, you want to have management, representative, marketing, sales, maybe operations. You don't want it more than that. But man, there's nothing worse than when you see a scoping call and there's 32 people have been invited to it, and
Yeah.
it's just a disaster in the making, and nothing is going to
Sure.
happen. And you're like, no, we got to break this into smaller groups, kids.
But at least one salesperson.
You just kind of need one representative from
Yeah.
each group, but not necessarily all at the same time. Maybe initially, but boy, it gets a little. I know we've all had the clients where everybody in the company shows up, right? And you just want to.
Gosh, man, talk about pressure. The most that we've had was 18 folks on a call, and you're like, guys, there's probably like $2,000 an hour sitting at this meeting right now,
Right.
And we got to get the input, but keep it realistic as well.
Well, not only that, but if there's that many, a lot of times the lower level people won't interject anything in the meeting because they're intimidated.
And that's what I find difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's hard for them to advocate for themselves, and I think it's really understanding company culture, your users, like who's actually using it, why are they making the decisions, and find I like to look at, especially if we're migrating from an existing software, what are they currently doing, what are they used to already, and try and make that as similar as possible right now. To help with that kind of adoption.
I just tell them all to go buy Patrick Lencioni's book, Death by Meeting, and call me back after they've read it, and then we can make some progress after that.
Actually, okay, so in one of my forms, when we send to people at the beginning, when we're trying to figure out stuff, one of my questions is, how many meetings do you have a week? And the variance in the numbers of meetings people have a week is pretty awesome. And the other thing is, I say, do you have a defined sales process already? And some people say yes, like the president will go, yes, we definitely do, and the salesman will go, no, not really. Those are very revealing things like that. But anyway,
it really is.
Yeah, and I think that's where we start to have the symbiotic relationship between an initial prompt of, here are the things that we're going to discuss in our intake calls. Whether you do that through a questionnaire or you just prompt them, hey, we're going to be discussing this process. Please, perhaps have an internal discussion to get on the same page, because oftentimes we find, yes, that everyone has a different idea of what a process is, how well defined it should be, and what that guideline is going to look like for how the system is going to help support that. And that everyone has a different idea of, task management and details. Some people love going in there and having options and, all of these notifications. Other people get completely overwhelmed by it.
Kill me now.
Love the idea. What's that?
Kill me now.
Yeah.
And pop-ups and no.
And when you have multiple channels open, it can become very daunting. And that's why I like to define upfront with the client, what channels are we going to be using? And what is the expectation for turnaround times if you use a given channel? Because otherwise, you just end up living across notifications and tasks. And I loved some of the feedback in the chat here about using user views or reports for a lot of action items. I've gone away from assigning tasks to a lot of action items in the system, and I'll just set up a view. I'll just say, okay, sales rep, you responsible for proposal generation. So here's your view. There's a stage called proposal, needs proposal. That as soon as something hits that queue, you have a prioritized queue of, what proposals you need to get out the door. You don't need a task telling you every single proposal you need to do. Here's the list. And that makes things so much cleaner and less daunting. And quite honestly, the task's more impactful at that point, because if you have 5 tasks, it's a lot more meaningful than having 50.
Just the same way that we can get overwhelmed with email, we can get overwhelmed with every other part of the CRM, and really finding out like the balanced solution to keep everything organized is really important. I think the one thing that I'll also add is user stories is something that we do a lot of, maybe a little bit more informally right now. But using this kind of workflow diagrams, like if we're trying to really understand user behavior, right, put ourselves in the shoes and walk through, hey, this is how they currently are setting it up, right, from a benchmarking and an intake standpoint. But then, you know, in the proposed solution standpoint, like how would a user actually go through the system, and comparing the two. And I think that can be really helpful as a dedicated like map. More and more, you know, design thinking. That's our thing.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, we've had a few prompts here that are going to lead to our next webinar, which is going to be project management, you know, and talking about agile development, user stories, and I think that that's going to be a very interesting topic for how we govern scope in light of a use case, you know, a business process, a use case, a user story, and how do we actually come up with a defined scope of work, estimate, budget for something that's as ambiguous as, you know, we want this process improved.
Yeah, like Max's question in the Q&A, like we could probably spend like 20 minutes just discussing just that, you know. It's so complicated to be able to take a, you know, hey, this is what we got to do. How are we going to do it? Like, how do you get buy-in instead of, you know, trying to get a client to pay you 100K on the spot? Like, how do you actually distribute this? It's complicated. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that, you know, so far we've discussed, you know, at a high level, mapping out processes, perhaps starting to identify, you know, what modules you need, which apps we're going to be using. We're going down into some very detailed discussions of, you know, lead statuses, deal stages, blueprints, and it's so easy to get kind of buried down into these rabbit holes. So what I like to do is always come and bring things up to the 10,000-foot view throughout this the scoping phase with the client. And ultimately, this is another graphic that we use that can be quite helpful, which is really just defining how all of these pieces are coming together to support each department. So this is a little diagramming tool that we developed in part of our client portal, where we ask the client to map out their customer lifecycle or their department. So here you can see that we have, you know, marketing, sales, ops, accounting, and support. And sorry, in this example, we duplicated marketing there. But the intent here is to really show which Zoho apps are going to help support that department's needs. And with, you know, 45 plus apps out there, it can be quite daunting to see how this whole puzzle is going to fit together. And this is just an interesting graphic to help a client understand, you know, how the different Zoho apps are going to come into play at different points in the process, what their whole tech ecosystem is going to look like. And quite frankly, this becomes a great discussion point for opening up additional opportunities for Zoho One. I mean, we saw in the chat thread here that the age of the CRM consultant is done. You know, we are here as system integrators, and we have to take a solutions approach with multiple apps that are all need to connect, and you know, we need to understand how that's going to work. So we like to plot out their whole tech ecosystem as it exists today, see which department is using what, and then we'll go through and say, hey, did you know that Zoho has an app for that? You know, we may as well bring that into the ecosystem because it's going to be that much easier to report, automate, and, you know, give user access, govern permissions, etc. So this graphic kind of helps us keep things at that high level as well. So we constantly have this push and pull between understanding the overall scope, direction, what their tech ecosystem looks like, diving into the detail where we need to you know, get some of those more concrete action items and scopes of work. But the question I want to pose to the other panels here is, how do you guys help clients wrap their head around Zoho One? I mean, there are a lot of apps, there are a lot of processes. How do you strike that balance between getting them excited about getting into this whole ecosystem, but also coming up with a manageable approach to it so that they're not learning 20 new apps all at once?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important is managing expectations, right? Not all Zoho apps are created equal. And, you know, especially like, you know, you have your newer apps or new features and functionality that you want to give a little bit of time to like work out some of those bugs. Zoho works very rapidly. They will pick them up and, you know, they learn from their mistakes and address it. And that's the best part about working with Zoho. but I think managing those expectations is really important. I like how this laid out for that. And I think one thing that you said, it's important to also include, what your existing, tech stack is. But sometimes a Zoho app may not be the right solution. I think that a diagram like this helps us identify, well, hey, like we know like we're using campaigns in these 3 places. Maybe just for marketing, it would be fine to use campaigns. But if we're looking at the whole overall system, we really need a strategy where a larger system that might be more, better at scale, maybe like a MailChimp or Active Campaigns might be better for this, client, right?
Yeah, we did a similar thing, Vanu. I mean, we've got, I don't know, probably 1,000 hours into our resource library over at Zenatta.com, where we break down every single application, and we break it down into yes, maybe, and no, which is a little controversial, but we basically say, yes, these are best in class, no problem, use them. Maybe, and it's not because they're not great apps, but it's like you were saying, there are some, QuickBooks and Zoho Books. Zoho Books is great, but let's face it, all QuickBooks does is QuickBooks, right? All they do is finance, and it does things that certain businesses need. And so you kind of got to take that approach with them. Well, and that's where every single app can break down. And while the bulk of them sitting yes, the maybes and the no's, you have to say, look, these might not be for you, and or they can be, maybe they will be in time, because as we know, Zoho apps, they improve every single day as they kind of go along. I mean, every week as you kind of go through that. And also, I don't know, it might be worth it. We recorded a video we do it every year on Zoho One, and in 1 hour and 3 minutes this year, we covered all 40 applications, right? And it's kind of like, go to YouTube, take a look at that, and give me your thoughts afterwards, because it saves them a lot of time, and they can kind of go through and get an idea of what's going on there, right? But it's a process. I mean, especially, and I think you have to coach people too. I mean, sometimes I think they get Zoho One and they want to go crazy. I want to put my whole company on Zoho One. I want to move my mail. I want to, and it's like, wow, time out, man. We gotta, like someone in the chat room said, break it down into stages and baby steps. And you kind of gotta, because you can't cause that much upheaval in a company.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the company, they can't handle those kind of changes all at once usually. And oftentimes, while yes, eventually you may get them there, but it may take a year or 2 years to get there. I think going all at once is brutal.
And from the opposite direction, when you're building up from your smaller companies, right? Like that, they didn't even buy Calendly yet, right? Like, or Acuity scheduling. So Zoho Bookings is great, right? We like to encourage, use the primary core Zoho apps that CRM, the finance suite is just destroying right now. It's awesome. And I'm very happy with it. But then like bookings, right? Like, well, if you're a smaller company, use it, right? Like R&D with it, learn what's important. Like we learned recruiting through Zoho Recruit, right? Like what are the key terms in this industry? You've never done recruiting before, right? So you don't know, why would you go buy an ATS or, start getting into this crazy world where you don't even know what the terms are, what the principles are, right? So use like these peripheral Zoho One apps to help you learn and identify what do you actually need, what is working and what isn't, to define the specs for what a software should be doing for you. Then you can say, can I customize it, or is another app better for my purposes?
John Mark, I like this wheel, but I think it doesn't set expectations very well. Because to me, it looks like you're going to implement everything. And so it's kind of like, oh yeah, here's the picture. And I'm wondering if a different kind of thing wouldn't be better, where you could put them in swim lanes, vertical, here's what we're doing and here's the time phasing.
Yeah, and I think that the balance that we try to strike is understanding what this tech ecosystem and this end goal is going to look like. We've got ourselves into traps in the early days where we would implement the immediate task at hand, that initial SOW, without discussing what the end state is going to look like 2 years from now. And then we end up having to re-architect the system because we didn't know that they were planning on moving the finance suite over from, QuickBooks to Zoho Finance Suite. So we end up using the native modules only to find out in 6 months' time, native finance modules in CRM as opposed to the finance suite, not realizing that, geez, in 6 months' time, they had this vision of using Zoho Books. So why would we go through all this effort in implementing the CRM native finance modules if we just have to do this in Zoho Books? So this helps paint, yes, that broader picture of where are we going to go in the next 2 years, so that we can at least put that pin on the map, understand that this is going to have a role to play, and then we can start to discuss the priority as part of our project plan. So in our world, what we do is we have this whole intake process, right? We're discussing a little bit about the stakeholder interviews, the business processes. We talk about entity relationships, and we talk about the whole tech ecosystem. All of that information is just that, it's information. There's no plan behind it yet. And we actually assimilate that into now that project plan and that scope of work. The project plan paints this roadmap, this larger picture of where we're going to go over the next 18 months. And that's typically how we frame it. You know, look, we're going to give you a little bit of a roadmap here for the next 18 months. We always pitch ourselves as a partner to their business. We look for good culture fit as well as a technical fit with the project, because a large number of our clients stick with us over the years, and you know, we help implement new things. So we create this larger project plan with an initial scope of work, so we know the direction, and that usually speaks to the order in which we're implementing these products. And that kind of brings us to a way to organize all of this, right? And I think we can all agree that there are these critical components that need to be discussed. Every consultancy has their own process for conducting those interviews, documenting processes, their scopes of work. But I think that we can all agree on one thing, and that's that there's a lot of information, and it's difficult to keep track of all of this, keep it current, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And I'd like to kind of segue here in the last few minutes to discussing some tools that we have available to do that. Over the years, we've developed a fantastic client portal that helps with this whole onboarding project management piece. And we now actually introducing this as an app that we're going to be launching. It's called the Business Process app. We're going to open it up. It's a closed beta right now. Any Zoho partners who are interested in getting access to that, please go ahead and sign up over here at catalystconnect.com/BPA. Please go over there to get access to today's recording, to get the slides, and then if you're interested, we can put you on the list to get access to this beta. It's basically a full web app that allows you to do things like define a best practice for process for an industry, put together your business plans, your process maps, your diagrams, all of these templates that you may want. We're even going to have custom function libraries, workflows, email templates. This is all stuff that we built into our portal. We're now making this available as a web app for other Zoho partners to create their own industry profiles, and as a way to manage that onboarding and project planning with their customers. There's actually going to be a marketplace component, so you can come up, Brett, with that best practice for real estate. You're going to have 35 versions of it, of course, but you'll be able to come up with some good templates for different industry questionnaires and approaches. Load that into a client profile, have them work on it, and then you can collaborate on it. Eventually, we're going to be taking this to a marketplace-based approach, so that if you do come up with a great vertical CRM or business process or business plan for an industry, you can actually sell that plan on the marketplace and have some clients self-implement off of your IP. So please, let us know if you'd like to have access and check it out. And opening up to the other panelists here, we've chatted a little bit about Lucidchart and some other tools, but what are your guys' favorite tools for doing this organization and process mapping, and any other tips and tricks that we can give to the folks on the webinar?
Lucidchart is the favorite of my entire team. We try to kind of put everything into Lucidchart at the end of the day, which is what I noticed a lot of yours is, right? And it's basically sitting there and kind of mapping that out with the clients and going through the overall process. It brings clarity to everything. It also, at the end of the day, people forget what they wanted sometimes. And it's like, well, no, this is this is clearly, remember this. So that, I think that's a little helpful. You can point to it. So that's a big one for us.
Yeah, Lucidchart is what we're currently using. I'll admit that we're not happy with any of them. I think that what we would want, we want a lot. So I think that there's also a tech component to this. Like I think that, like, I'm a big whiteboard person, and I can map that out very easily, quickly, especially on a client call. And so like we're working on some tech stuff, iPad, Apple Pencil, where that is compatible with Lucidchart, having that connected with your Mac. You're able to do the screen share, but you're able to literally draw it out on your pad like it would be on a whiteboard and make it easier. I don't think Lucidchart is the right solution for it still, but I think that there's definitely technology out there that will work with that type of methodology that you can then, like, Lucidchart's a little too pretty for me. It doesn't work fast enough to like work at the pace of brain,
That's
Well,
mine.
my devs love it. So, we're a little different. Our developers are directly talking to the clients. I mean, there's no project managers or account in between. It's just dev and client. And they may move from one dev to the next, depending on what type of product they're working on. We also, like you, John Mark, nothing quite as fancy as beautiful, but we have an internal creator application that drives much of everything, right? Much of the product. It talks to CRM, talks to projects, does those things, kind of pulls it all together. And at the end of every meeting, sends an automated, here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do, here's our next meeting, right? To kind of keep things on track, on focus. But I think what you've got in this tool, we've talked about this for a very, very long time now. And it's just, it's beautiful. I mean, it is kind of the be all end all as far as kind of this entire business process onboarding goes. So it's going to be great to see this roll out. When are you expecting to hit? Is it beta now available?
Yeah, we're going to be doing a slow roll on the beta. So we're going to be releasing it out to probably about 5 partners at a time. We want to get some early feedback incorporated, so that way we can roll it out with as few bugs as possible. So we've done some internal testing now, ready to get some industry feedback. Of course, it's based on our process, so a lot of the things and approaches are based on our experience, not others as well. So we're looking for some of that feedback. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to all increase our bandwidth. I mean, gosh, I think that we've never been busier as a Zoho partner network, right? And as much as we want to, we can't get to all of our client implementations. And if we can be more efficient at those implementations, and if we get good at certain processes and approaches or industries, and we can come up with a productized approach for how to implement Zoho and make that available to folks that want to self-implement, it's a way that us partners can create some product out of our process IP. We have all this knowledge. We know how to approach an implementation. And I think that Zoho is doing a fantastic job on documenting the technical aspects of their software. But there's still a gap, and that's where we come in, is really marrying a business process to the software. And if we can come up with good frameworks of how to handle that and sell that, the intent of this is to not only organize our own processes for doing our professional services, but also perhaps have some go-to-market strategies for implementing technology in different industries. And how can we give that go-to guide for clients? And I know that we're all doing this in our own way. And I'd like to encourage everyone to listen to Brett's podcast each week that goes over updates. There are a lot of great use cases and implementations that he discusses, as well as just keeping up to speed on everything that's going on with Zoho. Of course, Susan has a new book coming out on the full Zoho One suite, and that's going to discuss a lot of use case type implementations for different tools, which is going to be fantastic. And Vinu is a great resource for any kind of technical automation in Zoho. We've worked with him on a few complex clients, and man, definitely hit Vinu up if you want to discuss automation within the Zoho ecosystem. I know that we're at the top of the hour here, so I think that I'll open it up to anyone with closing remarks here, but want to try and keep on schedule. So does anyone have anything else to add for today's webinar?
No, fantastic. Thank you for having me.
No, yeah, this was fun. Well, I'm excited to see we're gonna get into it next time.
Yeah, and please, guys, if you wouldn't mind going to that catalystconnect.com/BPA, we also have a question on there on what you guys would like to discuss on the next meeting. So any particular pain points or things that you would like to learn from other Zoho partners on how to approach certain aspects. One of, I think, the most pressing topics at hand or areas of interest is going to be project management and scoping. But would love to hear your feedback on today's session and thoughts on what you'd like to hear next time. So with that, thanks everyone, and please reach out to us if you'd like to connect with any of us panelists, and we'd love to have synergy calls to see how we can all work better together. Thanks a lot, guys.